This is an idea we conceived a couple of years ago here at the Center for International and European Studies. Why? I mean, I'm a Greek academic that's been in this country since September 2010 at Kadir Has University, and I feel an obligation and a responsibility to try to keep anything that has to do with Greek-Turkish relations alive. In a way, you say Greek academic since 2010. Well, what I always say is that I am a product of the rapprochement process, or whatever we like to call it, that started in 1999 between the two countries. And even though that process goes through different phases, well, the truth of the matter is that there's been a significant group of Greeks, at least academics and not only, that have come to Turkey. There's mobility also, Turks to Greece, academics not so much, but that has to do with the education systems. We have a state system, education is in Greek. Here you've resolved some of the issues we keep discussing for decades in Greece about whether to have private or non-profit universities, and that's why so many of us do come. And so, you know, and as an IR scholar, I thought that we need to start a process, because what I've seen over the last years is that there was a rapprochement process that started as a result of tragic events, the dual earthquakes. And when the foreign ministers at the time took the lead in this process, George Papandreou and Ismail Cem, what they stressed a lot was people-to-people contact, civil society interacting with each other. And that happened for a while. But as you observe the process of rapprochement, it has changed over time. Usually whenever our leaders meet, last time it was earlier this year in, this year was it, right? Or last year, this year in Izmir. If you look at the joint communique that comes out, yes, we continue the process, but it's come down to basically increasing bilateral trade. It's come down to increasing it, doubling it, tripling it, and whatever else. And there's not so much mention about the people-to-people contacts. In fact, in 2009, when George Papandreou became prime minister, his first trip was in Turkey. It was a visit because there was another multilateral meeting happening here. But he made a few statements, but he never mentioned people-to-people contacts. He talked again about the trade aspect, which is significant. But what you've had also is, over a period of time, those that were involved in the initial phase of the process, and we're talking about 17 years now, have either, you know, passed away. One of them was Mehmet Ali Birand, who passed away, and he was instrumental, at least, in getting Greek and Turkish journalists to discuss issues of mutual interest. Or slowly they do meet, but they do not necessarily interact with other generations. And so as an educator, I thought, well, my responsibility would be to try to raise more awareness. And that's why we started this process. And I found some money. In this case, money is always a problem. Ideas, we have many. Money is a problem in order to be able to do projects. And NATO has been a partner for this event and the one in Thessaloniki last year. And we focused on bringing together 22 to 35-year-olds that have an IR background. So, and we have 15 Greeks and 15 Turks in the audience that were selected for this project. And this is a 4-day project. Again, I'm saying this with the audience that's also following us. It's a 4-day project going to be held here at Kadir Has University. This is the only open part of the project. We just thought we'll have an open discussion. Later in the afternoon, there'll be the 30 of you together with our trainers and others. And so the idea is to discuss a variety of issues that either have to do with Greek-Turkish relations, that either have to do with the wider security environment, and it's a very interesting one, since we live in interesting times, to do together some sort of peer-to-peer workshop whereby we might come up with project ideas for the future, and when one goes back to their daily lives, at least some of what we did here, whether it's friendships, whether it's partnerships, or whatever, continues somehow to impact on our lives later on. And that's how you build a network. And my idea is at least to do this for at least 5 years, or 6. And if every year I bring together 30 people, and if I can more, as I said, funding, if anyone has ideas for funding, I'm more than welcome to listen to them. Well, over time, you do this for 5 years, 30 people, 150 people, even if 10 of you keep this up, I've done my job. And that's the basis, the basic idea behind this. And so, yes, we've set up a 4-day program where we will have, for example, there will be a discussion tomorrow by 2 alumni from last year's event. 2 alumni from last year's event. That a Greek and a Turk that will be talking about their experience and really whether this has affected them or impacted them in their daily work. We will have a meeting on Friday at the Columbia Global Center where Ipek Cem, the daughter of Ismail Cem, is very active in Greek-Turkish relations. She's a director of the Columbia Global Center. Actually, earlier this year, she established together with George Papandreou the Cem Papandreou Award. And the first awardees were people involved, whether from the business sector or other sectors, in enhancing Greek-Turkish relations. And so we'll have a meeting there with members, Greek and Turkish members of the Greek-Turkish Forum, which is one of these formats that has been alive for a long time, a close group of individuals from Greece and Turkey, and actually and Cyprus as well, both sides, the north and from the north and the south, the Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, that try to influence the political process. We discuss among each other, and if there's anything interesting, we try to pass these ideas on to policymakers. And actually the Cypriot chapter has been very, very active, and a lot of the people involved in the Cypriot chapter are very much involved in the negotiations going on right now. We'll also be having a meeting on Saturday with journalists to talk about the perspective of journalists on relations, and all the while we'll be getting to know each other and training and so on. Now, it just so happens that, you know, in a way, it's not only coming to Turkey and being at Kadir Has University, but I'm more or less blessed because I have colleagues in my department, not only, that are very much knowledgeable about Greek-Turkish relations or interested in. One of my other colleagues, Professor Kostas Ifantis, who just walked in, is part of the department as well. So is the rector, Professor Mustafa Aydin, who he and Kostas Ifantis had written, co-edited a book. When was it, Costa? 2004, and it was really the first co-edited volume by a Greek and a Turk on Greek-Turkish relations. So there is a long-standing tradition we've all brought in, and now we've all come to this place, this beautiful glass house called Kadir Has University, where we can continue doing our job. And so one of the things that we thought of doing this time, we will get to the discussion between Kostas Ifantis and Mustafa Aydin in about an hour, but I was working with a Turkish colleague who's not here today. He's setting up another event that's starting tonight elsewhere, a survey, an elite survey of Turkish public opinion, of Turkish elite opinion regarding Greece. And how did this idea come about? Because actually, Kostas Ifantis and I, 2 or 3 years ago, we applied. There was a call from the Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics to do a proposal on Greek foreign policy, and we came up with this idea of a study of Greek elite and how they think about Greece and the world and Greek-Turkish relations, and those results were made public in November 2014, and it was an elite survey of Greek elites, and I thought it'd be nice to also have a Turkish elite survey. And then we can talk later about what this actually means and so on. So we have pretty comparable results. And so we just thought we'd bring this in because this might also shape our debates and discussion. And this is actually the first time that they're being presented. We will have, I think, the university's planning for a presentation maybe in a couple of weeks to the press But when I did my research with my colleague Cihan Dizdaroglu, we were not thinking about the press. Our job was to try to come up with results and see, as analysts, as academics, how we can use this. What do we understand about relations between the two countries? So let me start maybe by, wait, I'm so clumsy when it comes to these things. Okay, so let me start a little bit by presenting the survey. Oops. No, what am I doing wrong? I have to open it. Turn it around, of course. Thank you. I don't like PowerPoints. And actually, when I teach, I prefer to draw on the board and erase, because I hate it when my students put up their phones to take snapshots, thinking that they got all the notes from that. This new tendency, I hate it. So I prefer to write. Students who listen, some of them are here, they're smiling, I know, and erase and go on. The visual is important, but I don't use a PowerPoint so much. So this is an elite survey, and we focused on 6 categories of elites. Businessmen, and it says they're members of TUSIAD, TOB, MUSIAD, TUSCON, when they were around, some of these organizations. But anyway, journalists, diplomats, the military, politicians, and academics and think tanks. So we focused on 6 categories of elites, and this was basically modeled after the Greek survey, where we focused on the Greek elites in these categories. And it was hosted by Infakto Research Workshop, a pretty reputable polling organization run by Professor Emre Erdogan. And there were 2 launches, as you can see here, and again, the research team. Now, the results are important. Okay, according to Emre, to Infakto, anything over 6-7% is okay. But, you know, you can see that to how many people we sent questionnaires out to, what the percentages were. And so what we did is we have the academics stand alone, the military stand alone. We grouped together the diplomats, the journalists, and the businessmen, and we took the politicians out. There were no responses. And I'll get to this at the end as to why there might have been no responses. And you will see that in contrast to the first survey, this is a survey I was talking to you about, the one I did with my colleague Kostas Ifantis, and actually the survey was presented on the 17th of November when we finally put it out there and it was published. And this was also hosted by Kappa Research, which is another company in Greece that does a lot of polling, right? But in the Greek survey, we had much better response rate, actually about 41%. And in the Greek survey, we actually kept each category on its own as we were analyzing, right? But I'm just saying this just for background, and even though I'm going to present right now basically most or some of the results of the Turkish elite survey, there will be times during my presentation where I make some references to the Greek survey, because there are some things that are interesting because some of the questions were the same. And of course, this survey talked about basically divided into 3 parts: Turkey's position in the world, Greek foreign policy, and Greek-Turkish relations, or Turkish-Greek relations. Well, so let's go quickly over some of the questions. Remember, this is not a public opinion survey. This is an elite survey, right? Do you believe that Turkish foreign policy can influence international politics? Well, a vast majority, one group, the yes and the rather yes, agrees among the Turkish elite. And by category, but we'll go through this quickly. Then, whether Turkey can influence international politics with the quality of its ideas and its commitment to international law. Divided response, 41%. By the way, when we did this comparable question in the Greek survey, it was much higher. From a Greek perspective, a small country, a medium-sized country, depends on these things more, right? It makes sense as to why. Turkey can influence international politics because of its membership in several international organizations. Well, you see the results, 65.7% of the respondents said yes, as opposed to 21, which disagreed. Turkey meets the international obligations deriving from its participation in the UN, NATO. Again, 57% yes, a quarter say no. To what degree do you believe that global concerns, and we've stated some over there, concern for Turkish foreign policy? Well, a great majority, 3/4 of those surveyed said yes, to a great degree. And of course, this thing, whether Turkish foreign policy should be more active and not limited beyond traditional disputes, 71% of Turkish elite think it should be. I think it also reflects public opinion tendencies and polls, but this is more or less our responses. Have the principles of Turkish foreign policy and the influence of the country been influenced due to the Arab Spring, and to what degree? 71%. Of course, when we designed the survey, the political context was a bit different here. There was a prime minister and his principles being applied. But anyway, right? So we were thinking a lot of Ahmed Davutoğlu at the time, but this is more or less what the elites think. And then some other questions. Is Turkey distancing itself from the West and moving? Elite opinion suggests that to a large degree, yes. And whether Turkey can play this bridge role, which has traditionally been an issue for Turkish foreign policy, about 58.1%. Now, when we started moving towards question dealing with Greece, Greece is a strategic partner of the US. These are Turkish perceptions, right? So about 46% think it is, and 30% disagree. Whether, even though Greece is a small country, it can influence international politics. Well, a substantial majority thinks that it can. And also a substantial minority thinks that it cannot. It's an important EU member state. Well, about 50% think it is. And if you combine EU and NATO, even greater percentage of Turkish elite think that, that Turkey can influence international politics. Basic questions about the economic crisis. We did not go on, we did not explore whether and to what extent, positively, negatively. There were just general answers. So 84% thought the crisis has impacted, and it has impacted also on the prestige and influence of the country to a large extent. Interesting question, and I'll get to this towards the end. Does Greece have any alternatives other than the EU? Overwhelmingly, Turkish elite think no. Overwhelmingly. Turkey can play an active role in reducing the EU's energy dependence. We asked a question about energy, which we did not have in the Greek survey. Yes, but interestingly enough, this is a positive thing, Turkish elite also thought that Greece can play an active role. A refugee crisis, we did not have this question in the Greek survey. It was not really on when we started, when we sort of formulated the questions. But here, as opposed to the energy question before, yes, Turkey is playing an active role, and Greece is not at all. So problematic a little bit, right? 12% think that Greece is actually playing an active role, and 41% do not think so. So whether Turkey is a constructive player in the resolution of the Cyprus issue, 52.3% of Turkish elite think it is. Is Greece obstructing the resolution? 72.7% think that it is. And these are interesting times because, you know, are we going towards an endgame to Cyprus or not? There are meetings scheduled for early January to see whether we can actually have a solution. Here's a comparative question, because when we say Turkish elites, it's from the Turkish elite survey, and the Greek elites from the Greek elite survey. Well, I talked about this before. I just put them together. That's what we did, the questions. So actually I made a mistake. It's not Greek elites, it's just the two pie charts. Let's go. Turkish elites. This is a question we asked of the Turkish. Do you agree with the rapprochement strategy Turkey is implementing towards Greece since 1999? 89% of Turkish elites agree with it. When we asked the same question to the Greek elites, it's the strategy Greece is implementing, it was about 63.5%. So this fundamentally shows that there is elite support for the general strategy. And this again is just put in this form so you can see it more visually, 89% as opposed to 63, both positive numbers. The Turkish elite, Greece is steadily supporting Turkey's accession to the EU. 25% think that it is, while 56% do not think that it is. When we asked the Greek elites, should Greece continue supporting, 51% thought that it should, 36% did not. Obviously the numbers are different. And we'll talk about this at the end. And again, visually, the numbers we just talk about. Greece's membership in the EU constitutes a threat for Turkey's accession. 50.6%, more than half think that it does. And remember, I'm going back to a couple of questions. You link it to questions that I showed before. So 50.6% think that Greece constitutes a threat for Turkish accession, and before we had those two questions about whether Greece is an important member of the EU and NATO. So there is some sort of correlation, the perception of how Turkish elite view Greece's role. The most important question for me: can Turkey trust Greece? Only 28% said that it can. And this is a combination of the totally agree and the rather agree. Well, we asked the same question of the Greek elites. Basically the same. Trust, after all these years. Here it is again. Lacking. Thank God for the 20% and the 10%. These were comparable questions we asked. So to the Turkish elites, whether an improvement in Greece's economy is in Turkey's interest, 79% agreed. We asked the same question about Turkey's economy. It was more muted, the responses to the Greek elites, of the Greek elites. The economic crisis constitutes a threat. 44.8% of Turkish elites think that it does. And Turkish direct investment to Greece is a threat to Greek national interests. 61% thought that they are a threat. And we can talk about this as to why. The Turkish elite, how would you evaluate the current state of Turkish-Greek relations? 42.4% think it's good. 41.9%, neither good nor bad. And almost comparable results, I would say, when we ask the same questions to the Greeks. 34.7% think that it's good, but 47% think it's neither good nor bad. Interesting question here. How important is the resolution of the Cyprus issue for the improvement of bilateral relations? Well, if we add the extremely important, very important, rather important, we get those those figures, right? 95.9, 92.4. Wow, there we think alike. We think alike on this. Do you think there could be a crisis between Greece and Turkey over the next 5 years? When we asked this of the Turkish elites, well, we saw which responses sort of tend to dominate. And we asked the same question of the Greek elites, more or less comparable numbers. And which of the following is most likely to cause a hot crisis? Well, we gave 5 variables. They were a bit different, and I'll explain to them, to the Turkish elites, a bit different from the ones we gave to the Greek elites. So the Aegean issues, the Cyprus issue, energy resources in the Eastern Med, Thrace, and refugee issue. And we see the predominance of the Aegean issue, right? And then maybe the energy resources, the Eastern Med. And it's very interesting how the refugee issue is sort of creeping up. Now, when we asked the same thing of the Greek elites, we only had 4 variables. an internal crisis in Turkey, Cyprus, Thrace, and the Aegean. And I think it also has to do with how we view things. Aegean also means what's happening in the Eastern Med for Greece. So the numbers are more or less comparable. We did not look at the refugee question in our questionnaire, but an internal crisis is also something in the Greek psyche and in Greek, when we analyze Turkey. Usually when there is, crisis is a very wide word. The changes in Turkey right now, that could also be considered a crisis. So if we put this in the context, of what is happening today, this is a very interesting answer. How to interpret Turkish policy in general. And this is a slide from another survey. Kadir Has University actually does a survey every year of Turkish public opinion regarding Greek-Turkish relations, regarding Turkish foreign policy. But there was a question in the survey last year: is there a problem between Greece and Turkey? And these were the numbers, but actually the numbers are comparable to Turkish elite opinions, because if you add the Cyprus, the border problems, with militarization of the Aegean Islands, with political relations, with islands dispute, they sort of add up. Because in the Greek case, we said Aegean in general. So there is some comparison, direct comparison between public opinion and elite opinion. Now, this was, in general, a presentation of some of the results. And soon we'll be putting all this up online, and we'll be also analyzing it further. Now, before I get to some food for thought, a couple of things one needs to consider. There is, how do you explain the reticence? You saw the numbers at the beginning, right? The reticence of Turkish elites to respond, as opposed to a fairly successful sample from the Greek elites. It might be the political climate in the country. But after all, I was being extra careful. We said when we prepared the text, because this is a blind survey. I mean, what we basically asked, there's another question which I didn't put up there, but it is up there. How, when we send this to the elites, they have to self-identify themselves as to which category they fall in. There's no other way for me to know who answered the question, right? It's based on self-identification. So it's a very safe sort of environment. You answer your thing, I do not know. We just get and analyze the results. And I was especially careful, saying, okay, should I show that this is a survey done by a Greek? And we did not even put my name initially. We just said it's a Kadir Has University survey. Because it is, right? It was a text that I wrote in English, translated into Turkish, to present it to them as to wanting with their response. And remember, we did 2 batches, and the second batch just finished, and we had the results also factored in. There I added an extra text explaining what this is about, and I added my name. The results were about the same, the response rate. So it might well be there's a general reticence to reply, or lack of interest, or maybe we are trying to evaluate, because we would like to continue with this, our approach next time. Maybe one has to receive personalized emails, but we'll see. It might be that we approach our audience wrong, but we are also discussing with Infakto on how to improve this. And of course, as I told you at the beginning, the surveys were done at slightly different times, between 16 to 25 months difference, but they're almost parallel, right? But there were no questions about the refugee issue, because we did not consider at the time that it was such a relevant issue. No distinction in the Greek survey between the Aegean and the Eastern Med, but that's how we approach things in Greece, right? And how we approach the Greek-Turkish relations. And also, no question regarding who's constructive or not regarding Cyprus. That's because, I was thinking about it today, I think that's also because of how we approach things, The Greek discourse has been, Cyprus decides, Greece supports. So it's not about being constructive. We're being constructive because we support. It might be changing now as we enter into negotiations, but the Greek discourse for over a decade has been that. So it's not a question. We're being constructive by supporting and by not interfering. So there was no reason for us to ask the question of the Greek elites, as opposed to asking the question of the Turkish elite. The perspective is slightly different. But other than that, some food for thought. And these are my takes. Low levels of trust, right, on both sides. Strong, relatively strong support of the rapprochement, for the rapprochement process among elites in both countries. The overwhelming importance of the Cyprus issue for both sides for the resolution of bilateral issues, right? The question was not about supporting a resolution to the Cyprus question, is how important it is in the resolution in helping resolve Greek-Turkish relations. And this was the same question posed to both sides. The potential, we saw it, of energy as an area of cooperation. It's a question we asked the Turkish elite, and they were positive also about Greece's role. So potentially there might be something there we need to assess or analyze. But then the refugee crisis potentially could be troubling. Of course, the refugee crisis is unfolding. We have the whole EU-Turkey deal up in the air. We do not know whether it's its finality is going to be. So it's an issue that's evolving, that's in the news, and that could also affect response rates. And of course, the question that we had in the Greek survey about the four criteria, the Aegean, the Cyprus issue, developments in Thrace, and an internal crisis in Turkey. And as I said, the word internal is a wide word, meaning anything that has to do with the political climate in Turkey and how that has an impact on Greek-Turkish relations. Well, it's interesting. Had we done the survey now, I think that would be even greater. But it's still, if you go back to the Greek results, it still is a pretty significant factor of the responses. After the Aegean, it's an internal crisis in Turkey. Okay. Now, strong suspicion among Turkish elite regarding Greek membership in the EU and Greek support to Turkey's accession bid. In Greek, the discourse is that we are the ones that want a step ahead, Greece went ahead, lifting its veto to Turkey's accession bid, and hence we started the accession process. So it's very interesting how it's viewed, and in fact, there's almost a direct correlation. It does not only apply to Greece and the EU, but I think it applies in general to Turkey's relations with how it sees vis-a-vis maybe the Western world, right? A direct correlation, we go back to the questions between the perceived role of Greece in the EU and its lack of alternatives, and Greece's need for a greater international role and distancing from the West. Also, regarding the resolution of the Cyprus issues, Turkish elites perceive Turkey to be a constructive player, but while Greece is not perceived to be one. We have to keep that in mind. And again, there's almost same responses in a sense. If there were to be a crisis between the two countries, well, if the Turkish elite think the Aegean disputes would be the ones leading probably to a crisis, or the energy issue in the Eastern Med, well, I told you before, we've bunched those things in the Greek survey. And so there's that comparable. Now, and of course, the other factor, if you think about it, that okay, a rapprochement process is at one, and I'll talk about this in a second. But actually, pretty high numbers suggest that they're neither good nor bad. It's some sort of, continuance of a status quo. We're in a rapprochement process, but fundamentally nothing has been resolved. Fundamentally nothing has been resolved, right? And this is numbers you saw, the Greek numbers, the Turkish numbers first. Turkish elite numbers 41.9% to 47% by the Greek elites. Well, same sort of minority, give or take 5 percentage points, consider them to be neither bad nor good. To be bad or rather bad. And so I was thinking of a term because one of the speakers, the participants to the forum we listened to on Friday, Ambassador Volkan Vural, I remember in a discussion had said we are not. And he knows relations pretty well, that we are not in a rapprochement process. We are not, because the rapprochement process is probably a misnomer. What France and Germany have going is a rapprochement process. Right? There is a treaty, a friendship and cooperation, and there are structures in place to keep the rapprochement going. An obligation by the two sides to keep the rapprochement going across generations. We call it rapprochement, for lack of a better word, but if you put everything together, I came up with the term cold peace. It's not a novel term, but maybe we are in a period of cold peace. in that the two countries, since 1999, not necessarily rapprochement, some potential interdependence, and some of the economic questions and others, energy, might suggest that, an unwillingness or an inability to resolve outstanding issues. When I ask Turkish or Greek diplomats, active or retired, whether Turkey, I ask the Turkish diplomats, or whether Greece, I ask the Greek diplomats, want to resolve the Greek-Turkish issues, I never get an answer. I ask a very simple question. Do we want to resolve it? We can talk about it. I'm sure our diplomats have the plans, it's political leaders to agree, but do we want as countries? So maybe the neither nor is the best approach. And of course, it's an interesting thing about Cyprus. Not only the importance, but the importance of Cyprus in resolving Greek-Turkish relations, which means it's like passing the buck. You know, if the Cyprus issue is resolved, then that might help us. So you're sort of passing responsibility on to someone else. I mean, these are my takes as I was going through this, and one can go through different takes, right? And I think these are relevant because, again, there's also, maybe when we have our session with the journalists, we get another different perspectives, but it's also important given the fact that over the last month or so, a bit more, there is, at least in the Greek press, in Greek public opinion, in the reaction of the Greek Foreign Ministry, heightened interest in what's happening in Turkey. And because Greece feels targeted. So whenever there's a mention of the Lausanne Treaty, it impacts directly on Greek-Turkish relations because of its importance in the context of Greek-Turkish relations, right? It's not a question of how nuanced that was. Yes, there was a mention, but it has to do with something else. That could be. So in the Greek press, you hear more and more about this. And also now, as we are coming, as I said, to the finalité maybe in Cyprus, very interesting debates are taking place. Very interesting debates about the willingness or unwillingness of Greek elites, the Greek government, or the Greek Foreign Ministry, as to what its role should be, but that's also shaped by the perception of what the Turkish side is thinking, and I'm talking officially, right? So we've come to the other end where, as I was saying, that finding about over 95, 92% on both sides regarding the importance of Cyprus, well, we've come to the point now where we have even the Foreign Minister of Greece talking about defending Hellenism, which is a form of colonialism, I would say, and therefore the need to defend Hellenism in Cyprus. And one can find comparable statements by his Turkish counterparts, as now both sides are positioning themselves in this multilateral setting that's going to take place in Geneva at the beginning of January to finally resolve issues such as the security and guarantors issues in Cyprus. And so you have discourses of that sort coming out as well. So in that sense, this survey is interesting too, because it does provide a lot of food for thought, right? Trends, and that's why usually we had two different times when we surveyed people, right? Because the context might be a bit different, and we put all those results together. But at least from a Greek perspective, and I'm sure from Turkish perspective, well, what's making, for example, the Greek social media not only media rounds is new maps that the mayor of Ankara just published on Twitter and wherever about what Turkey should look like, which leaves Greece only its islands in the Ionian, probably because he forgot about them. But anyway, but this feeds in to this whole debate. So this is some of the results, and I am open to questions, commentaries. Maybe Professor Ifantis, you want to say something? Because you worked with me on that first survey. And the idea is now, because we have to, I'm thinking, and Professor Ifantis and I have been talking, and with my colleague Cihan Dizdaroglu, to continue this, to end up doing another survey next year at the same time, with same sort of questions. And why? Well, maybe this contributes a little bit to the thinking, because it's about, again, it's who shapes and who makes policy and who shapes opinion. So we'll be working on this. But Costa?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add?
Only one, although
Can we have a... Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a really brief remark about the Cyprus issue. Although Cyprus is considered overwhelmingly the most important issue in paving the way for full normalization, it is considered rather low as a source of conflict or crisis. This is interesting.
From the Greek side?
From both sides. Nobody thinks that Greeks and Turks will fight over Cyprus. But without resolving Cyprus, there is no progress.
Well, do you want to add something? You saw very briefly the results, but... Yes, let me take some questions. Introduce yourself, and let's hear you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Nikos Lambas. I teach at the University of Piraeus. Thank you very much for having us at this wonderful occasion. Not so much a question as something that actually came to mind when I was listening to your presentation. There might be a way to solve the issue with politicians not responding to the questionnaire. If we actually look at their public statements, my thesis is about elite perceptions also, and I did try to overcome that issue by just looking at what they say on public. There are a lot of conflicting views whether we can base our assumptions to public statements, but I think we might be able to find value, because actually I was also looking at the same thing, the same concept of, as a research project, elite perceptions of the Turkish threat and elite perceptions of the Greek threat. And I'm still trying to find a way to codify and go through statements, public statements of politicians regarding that issue. That might actually help your study too.
Okay, this is more disclosure.
Content analysis, actually.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Cihan Dizdaroglu. I'm a PhD candidate from Pantheon University of Athens. Yes, I know him very well, actually. And I have a comment that may lead to a question to you. I have the feeling from all the studies of the bilateral issues between Greece and Turkey that all the crises in the past and all the issues that were discussed were strictly bilateral, were issues between Greece and Turkey, and that was alone, even regarding the Cypriot issue. But I have a feeling that in the recent years there are problems between Greece and Turkey that are caused mainly from the external environment, from the situation in the Middle East, from the changing of European Union, from the new foreign policy of Russia maybe, and now probably from a new approach on foreign policy of the United States. I would like a comment on that, on whether are we passing to a new phase of bilateral issues between Greece and Turkey that are not initiated by these two countries.
The direct relations, and then expand about the general security environment, right? And yes, even though they're parallels, I mean, I always talk about or write about growing exceptionalisms in Greece and Turkey, but they might not necessarily be related to one another. And you're right, like by mentioning Russia and the security context. So absolutely, it's something we did not take into account here. But yes, it might be the case, and that leaves a lot of room for analysis as to what this might actually mean for Greek-Turkish relations. So I totally agree, and this is something we should maybe even discuss more during the course of the symposium. I agree. Anyone else? The Greeks are speaking. Another Greek, it's okay.
Hello, my name is Cristina Valenza. I'm from the Dimitrios PhD candidate from the Dimitrios University of Thrace, and I'm a partner with Chatham House in London. So my expertise is mostly on refugee crisis. I think what you've done with your survey was really, really interesting, and I can fully understand the reasons why you have not put questions regarding the refugee crisis, as it was not a so updated issue at that time. So a recommendation would be, when we are talking about policy making, as you may very well know, is that refugee crisis is a very important issue right now in policy making. So just a suggestion, it would be that it's an issue which has and is gonna, in my opinion, influence Greece and Turkey relations. So I think that issues such as refugee crisis and security or securitization of asylum within the EU-Turkey deal would be, I'm just like giving you some ideas about the potential next survey for the university. These issues would be very much appreciated, because if we are based in Greece, I mean, I assume most of us were based in Greece or Turkey, and this is very important to have input and feedback from scientists and experts and practitioners from the ground, rather than having people based all around Europe and having an opinion about the bilateral relations and the refugee crisis. So it's just a recommendation from my expertise how this crisis has played on human rights issues, on the relations between the two countries, and what's the impact on policy making at the European level, at the bilateral level, and global level when we're talking about mobility. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Damla Cihan Dizdaroglu from Sabancı University. I had also my master's in Greece in the University of Athens in 2008 and 2009. So when you talk about the conclusions, actually I was still thinking that we are in the rapprochement period, but the term cold peace, I think it's really interesting and an important term that we have to think both sides, because during 1999, let's say the founding fathers or the both elites of the both parts were thinking that Turkey will be part of the EU family at the end. So they were thinking this rapprochement will continue with the Turkey's membership to the EU. Therefore, they actually didn't push for so much cooperation after 10 years, let's say. You can also compare after 2009 or after 2011, the relations seems changing. So maybe you can add, this is also a comment, or if you think about this, in the next survey, you can add the question of how do you think Turkey-EU relations is impacting Greek-Turkey relations, and the opposite, or the, openly you can ask clearly maybe the possibility of the end of the Turkish-EU relations, how would this impact then Greek-Turkish relations? I think this is very important, because both sides, not only elites, the public was also thinking at that time membership will lead more cooperation, but now the things are so changing so quickly. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kirila Atanasova. I am from Sofia University. Currently, I'm doing an internship at Kadir Has. And as a bystander, mostly I'll make a comment because I'm Bulgarian. And actually, I was not surprised by the lack of trust between the elites, Turkish elites and Greek elites, because I think that here in the Balkans, we have this issue of not trusting the neighbors. And maybe you can also put the Greek-Turkish relations in the context of the Balkan countries' relations. And because everything that these relationships are, it derives from the lack of trust and also the prejudice of the people on the Balkans towards the neighbors. And congratulations on the survey, it's really interesting, and thank you very much.
I have a question. Okay, sorry. I am Fatih, and I am a PhD candidate here at Kadir Has University in International Relations Department. If a Russian aggression grows in time, both Greece and Turkey are part of the NATO, and to what extent NATO can initiate a kind of cooperation between Greece and Turkey if we are going to have a possible threat from Russia?
Possible threat from Russia, the threat to Greece and Turkey? I don't see that.
Yes, it's very unlikely, but what I'm trying to ask, okay, let me rephrase my question. How can the perception of Russian threat can impact NATO's decision to take more initiative to broker cooperation between Greece and Turkey?
Well, I mean,
It didn't work out during the Cold War.
it didn't work out during the Cold War, and it's not really working out right now. Supposedly there's a NATO mission in the Aegean that has to do with helping monitor the refugee flows, and Turkey's trying to find ways to get rid of it. This is the truth. So there's no real answer to that right now. I mean, it's in NATO's interest to make sure that the peace is brokered. I suspect that right now everyone is putting their efforts in trying to achieve some sort of settlement in Cyprus, and from there, that would conceivably help, in terms of trust. I don't think in terms of resolution of bilateral issues. But I do not know. Maybe the panelists in the next session might have something to say about that. The rector has been very silent, so I think he's gathering ideas for when he talks. But this is, I think, is fundamentally, I mean, yeah, as Professor Ifantis just said, we never resolved during the Cold War, and we're having a hard time coming to terms with it now. And again, it's all based on the perception, right? Because whether during the Cold War, and less so today, but still, from the Greek perspective at least, we have different conceptions of threats, right? For Greece, the perception is that the number one threat is Turkey, as long as these issues have not been resolved. And so for Greece and its national security and defense and so on. And so as long as that doesn't disappear, then the practicalities become very difficult to resolve. Yes?
You don't have to ask if you don't want to, but if there's anything that inspired you, otherwise we can move on to, just keep it in mind, even for the discussion later, and those taking part in the symposium, this might come up again, some of these findings might come up again during our discussions over the next 3-4 days. Okay. Well, good. We'll put an end to this now, and then maybe I will ask Professor Aydin and Professor Ifantis to come and sit and talk a little bit about the strategic environment and continue our discussions. Thank you.